To dive is the most exquisite experience. And I thought if I could in any way convey that, the sheer beauty of it in a completely alien environment, then that would be a wonderful thing to do. It would bring joy to people, I thought. It brings joy to me. I'd been a scuba diver for many years. I used to go scuba diving a lot when I worked in the Cayman Islands in the West Indies for a couple of years. And I always loved it. And I did it every time I got the opportunity. And I was diving in Grenada, and the dive master, I was talking to him after the dive, and he said, well, if all your work's about wildernesses and wild places, the last real wild place left is underwater, because it's the last undiscovered part of the planet. So you ought to do work about that. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, what an absurd suggestion. I'm a watercolorist. How can you do underwater watercolors? But it was an idea that just snagged on my brain. And so I thought about it for a long time and finally realized that there probably was a way to do it. And so I devised this way of drawing underwater with Swiss Caran d'Ache crayons, which are slightly water-soluble, on architect's drafting film, which is like a plastic paper. And I had a plastic drawing board, and I would clip the paper onto it. I would go down and sit on the bottom in about 30 or 40 feet of water with a handful of Caran d'Ache crayons and extra weights on my weight belt so that I would sit solidly on the bottom instead of sort of washing around in the waves. And I would simply see if this would work. And I found it worked perfectly well. In fact, the fish at first would come swimming up towards you to see what you were doing there and sort of, behave differently. But then after a while, they get used to you being there and they just get on with their lives. And in fact, they're very straightforward to draw. The drawings themselves are, not botanically or biologically accurate, because they can't be, because you're sort of washing around like this. But on the other hand, I know what most of these fish look like. I've been diving for many years, and so it wasn't difficult for me to then translate them when I got back onto dry land, onto making the big paintings that I did from the smaller sketches. So I loved using colours I seldom use. So these bright oranges and yellows, and just these brilliant, fantastic Windsor blues and stuff. I mean, you get colours on fish that you don't get anywhere else in nature. I suppose when you're diving normally, you're traveling around. Diving, I always say to people, is the nearest thing a human being can do to flying, actually, because you're weightless. You can go in any direction you like, up or down, sideways. You can do somersaults. You can do whatever you like underwater, and it is like flying. But you're moving all the time, and so you don't necessarily spend much time concentrating on a small area. And so I would try and treat it more like looking for a landscape. I would be trying to find certain elements that would work as a painting. And so you can't just do any bit of open ocean, or at least I felt I couldn't do that. I wanted it to be kind of anchored to a certain place, and I wanted that place to have some sort of landscape meaning in a way, so you could read it. And that meant that you'd have to line the corals up how you wanted them to be. I don't mean you'd have to alter where they were. You'd have to line yourself up so that you were in the right place, so that the painting you're trying to create would actually make some sort of visual sense. Yeah, so I'm very fond of this painting, I suppose, because this was painted in Little Cayman, just off Grand Cayman, where I lived for a couple of years. What I like about it, why I feel affectionately towards it, is that this particular area of Little Cayman is where every year shoals of big grouper, which are normally solitary, come together to breed. And so I was sitting in about, I think, 35 feet of water, doing this drawing, and this grouper came through this gap between the coral, and it came up to me and rubbed against me, and it kept coming back and rubbing against me, and I still don't know to this day whether in fact it was trying to breed with me or whether it was trying to get me to shift out of the way because it thought I shouldn't be in its territory. But anyhow, so there's the drawing of the grouper there that I did on the spot, and there's the the actual grouper itself. Some of these are soft corals. These are like sponges, these ones here. There's a huge variety of corals, hundreds and hundreds of different sorts. And these are called fan corals, and they wave like this in the current. They're just flat, like a fan, and they wave like in the current. And then some of them are hard corals, like these ones here. And so there are all, many, many different sorts of coral, and they're all quite distinctive. And usually, up until coral bleaching has struck, they are these exquisite colours, it's an utter tragedy what's happening to the coral reefs. These marks that you find on the underwater drawings, the metal clips hold the plastic paper to the plastic drawing board, but of course the salt in the end rusts them, and so these are just rust marks. And then if you look closely, you'll see all sorts of little notes that I write just to remind myself of what kind of fish were down there, and just observations that I make at the time. When I first started diving, you had a watch, a compass, a depth gauge, and a dagger strapped to your leg, and and one tank with a little piece of wire that when you ran out of air, you pulled the piece of wire, and theoretically you got another 10 minutes. But now it's all computerized. It's much more complicated than it used to be. So you enter the water looking more like a spaceman than a diver, really. And so adding to that a drawing board and the Caran d'Ache pencils is just another complication when you're trying to kind of clear your nose and adjust your thing and blow the water out of your mask and do all the other things you have to do when you're diving and pay attention. So these are the pencils I use underwater. They're Caran d'Ache, very high quality Swiss crayons, and they come in different grades of solubility. So the ones you want are the kind of medium soluble ones. If they're too soluble, they just disappear off the paper. If they're not soluble enough, they're kind of too scratchy and don't really work. So you want the medium grade, because then if you make a terrible mistake, you can just brush it off the paper. And so those are the ones you want, and you get quite a nice effect with them, and it seems to work. In fact, the only problem I discovered really is that you hang on to your pencils, and you've got you're also holding onto the drawing board, and you're working away here, and then if you loosen your grip, your pencils immediately fly off up to the surface, and you can't chase after them because you would get an embolism. And so you have to just let them go. And so by the end of a couple of weeks drawing underwater, you're down to the yellow, the red, and the grey. And so you're around looking for fish which actually have got those colours on, because otherwise there's nothing, you haven't got anything left. But that's the only technical problem with it, I think. If you look at the little drawings here, you can see quite clearly that this is pretty much directly taken from this drawing here. But in this case, I realized that I wanted a better look at this little butterfly fish, which is just here. And I loved the way these little orange fish are kind of squirreling around all over the place. And so I wanted to put a few of those in just to remind myself of that, but also to study that little butterfly fish a little closer. And this trevally jack here, it shows that the fish do pay attention to what's going on, because I was sitting down here. I learned from my diary here that I was down there for 85 minutes, which is a very long time on a single tank of air. But of course you can stay longer than you would normally expect to, because you're not moving, you're actually sitting still, so you're not using so much energy. But anyhow, this trevally jack was absolutely stationary here, as if it was posing for its portrait. And I was sitting drawing, and it was staying in the same place, just watching me. And then a snorkeler went past above and cast a shadow, which frightened the fish, and the fish went off in tremendous speed. They're very, very fast fish, these jacks. And then a few minutes later, it swung round and came back and stayed once again in exactly the same spot, watching what I was doing. So they do pay attention. They obviously think. I mean, people say goldfish have only got a 4-minute memory, but I don't believe that. I mean, you know, my goldfish at home certainly remember to come up to the surface to get fed every day. So, you know, I think fish, you know, are sentient beings who figure things out for themselves. They all have lifestyles that suit them. I think they do quite well. They live in a nice place, and you know, there's no reason to think they're not enjoying themselves. And I suppose it is a moment of communication of some sort, but it's hard to know what really. I mean, you have much greater communication, I suppose, with mammals when you're painting outdoors and a deer comes up and looks over your shoulder at what you're doing, and then just stands next to you and starts cropping the grass, which occasionally happens, that sort of thing, or you know, when monkeys are throwing tree branches at you and shrieking at you. That's the kind of communication which you can readily understand. But with fish, we don't expect to be able to communicate somehow, and yet, you know, it does happen. But when you're trying to do something which has a sense of distance, then these little fish down here, which are way in the distance, are probably in reality, you know, certainly as big as this one. But you have to have this sense of things right in your face, and then things way in the distance, because, you know, the water's very beautifully clear, gin clear, and so you can see quite a long way. You can see 150 feet probably, and so, you know, you can see things going on in the distance, little shoals of fish way in the distance, all sorts of things happening, things on the surface. These are little jacks of some sort, or like little mackerels, that kind of thing. So, you know, and you're conscious of all this going on, but as I say, normally if you're diving and swimming past this, you don't really see in any detail. You get a general impression, and you might stop and look at one particular fish doing something or other, but generally you're going from one place to another. Whereas I'm not. I'm just sitting and watching what's going on, you know, in the entire. Of course, you've got to, you know, this is what you see. You don't see too much this side or top or bottom. This is what you see looking through there. So your vision is constrained really, but that makes life simpler really. If you go and sit somewhere quietly and just concentrate and draw, it becomes a kind of magic. You have this sort of magic experience where you see just the extraordinary variety and beauty of these things. And so it is quite a moving thing to do, I think. I don't make sketches for my normal landscape paintings. I simply do the painting on site. And so it's not the result of a series of sketches done and then taken back to the studio. You know, the object you see in front of you is the one I had in front of me when I was working on site. Whereas with the underwater watercolors, that can't possibly be the case, can it? And so the sketches are included much as the souvenirs are included in the other, my more normal oeuvre, my more normal landscape paintings and you know, my watercolor diaries, in that the sketches are there to prove that I was actually sitting on the bottom doing it, in the same way that the stones that I bring from some site somewhere, or the leaves or the beads or the whatever it is I apply to the other paintings. It's the same thing. It's to prove that actually I was there doing it, and this is not simply me, you know, copying a photograph out of National Geographic. The reason I don't include, you know, I don't know, herds of wildebeests running across the landscape is because the landscape paintings are the result of long periods of time sitting in one place, studying what I'm painting. And if you were to put even a flock of birds flying across the sky, it would imply that this was a 30th of a second. Whereas what I want to imply is that this is, you know, 12 days sitting here studying this thing. This is not a fleeting glimpse of something. This is actually, you know, this is a long-term commitment to this particular place. Whereas underwater, you can't pretend that. You've got one tank of air, which is going to last you 50 minutes if you're lucky. And so there's no point in pretending, you know, this is a long-term commitment, sitting in this particular spot, painting this piece of coral. And so the sketches are very brief, and it would be a bit futile really just to do pictures of coral without any fish in them. I mean, they'd be pretty dull pictures. But the first one I did, I must admit, I did look at it and wonder whether it was actually a painting at all or a work of art at all. I looked at it and thought, perhaps this shouldn't be hanging in an art gallery at all. Perhaps it should be hanging in a fish and chip shop. But my artist friends came to see them. Some of them came to see them and looked at it and said, "Wow, these are amazing! You ought to do more of these. These are fantastic." And so I was sort of reassured that they were art. But I did wonder about it for a little while, thinking, "What am I doing? Painting all these damn fish." I think after I'd had the conversation with the dive master about working underwater as the last real wilderness, I think it was a few years before I finally devised this way of working. And I was doing an exhibition called Watermarks, which was about water in all its forms, from the frozen icebergs of Greenland through to the boiling geysers, or you call geysers, in Yellowstone. And I thought I should perhaps try some of the underwater things as part of that show. And I did do 2 paintings for that show, and then didn't do any more after that. And then when I started to plan the Exploring Beauty exhibition, I approached people who I'm calling my luminaries, people who are experts on living in wild places or have spent long periods of time in wild places, to ask them for nominations for the show. And I approached David Attenborough, or Sir David as he now is, and asked him to nominate somewhere. And at first he wrote a letter back. He always sends a handwritten letter, which is always a delight to receive these days, a handwritten letter saying, "Dear Tony, I'm very honoured to have been asked, and I've thought about this a lot, but I've decided I don't want to nominate anywhere." And at first I was a little crushed, but then I thought about it, and I wrote back and said, "I think I know why," because he said he wasn't sure why he didn't want to nominate somewhere, he just knew that he didn't want to. And so I wrote back and said, I thought I understood it, and my hunch was that it was because if he nominated somewhere he considered to be one of the most beautiful wild places in the world, it wouldn't stay wild for much longer. It would soon become the target for mass tourism, and it would be trampled to death by coach parties within a very short time. And so I quite understood his reluctance. Anyway, he then wrote back after that and said, "Actually, I have thought of somewhere that I can nominate with a clear conscience. I believe that underwater coral reefs, tropical coral reefs, are the most beautiful places I've ever seen." And so he made a nice statement for me, which appears in the catalogue and is on the wall here, and the resulting paintings came from that. With all my work, what I'm trying to do is give people the sense of what it's actually like to be there. And what really pleased me in some ways is when divers see these paintings, they say, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what it's like." And so that pleases me most, really. That sense of the light coming through the water, the sheer variety of the fish getting up to just getting on with their lives, and just this sense of you being in this extraordinary but very, very beautiful environment.